Though movies and television would like us to believe otherwise, it was very rare when gunfights occurred with the two gunfighters squarely facing each other from a distance in a dusty street. This romanticized image of the Old West gunfight was born in the dime novels of the late 19th century and perpetuated in the film era to such a point that this fictional version is what our mind's eye quickly conjures up when we hear the word gunfight. In actuality, the real gunfights of the Old West were rarely that civilized. Even more surprising, a quick hip shot was less significant than expected. Developing that skill takes time and ammunition. Ammunition that, even by today's standards, would be expensive. In the words of Wyatt Earp, the most important lesson I learned was that the winner of gunplay usually was the one who took his time. The second was that if I hoped to live on the frontier, I would shun flashy trick shooting as I would poison. I did not know a proficient gunfighter who had anything but contempt for the gun fanner or the man who shot from the hip. While the tall tales and cinematic depictions of gunfights are largely just that, there were still unforgettable duels in the Wild West. In today's video, we will reveal the story of the Old West in some of its most infamous showdowns. Stay tuned as we learn how these outlaws lived through blood, bullets, and buckskin to leave memories that we all remember today. Wild Bill Hickok versus Davis Tutt Jr. On July 21st, 1865, in Springfield, Missouri. One fateful night at the Lion House in Springfield, Missouri, a heated, drunken, card-table quarrel led to the most famous and one of the few prearranged quick-draw duels in Western history. Some say a dispute over a watch prodded gambler Dave Tutt into this fatal mismatch with Prince of Pistol Ears, James Butler, Wild Bill Hickok. Others say it was over a prostitute. Either way, the short, decisive two-shot battle in the town square the following July evening at 6 p.m. would turn Hickok into a household name and Tutt into a lying face down on the road. They were about 75 yards from each other with cap-and-ball revolvers when Hickok said, "Dave, don't come any closer," notes O'Neill. "That's one very difficult shot with a Civil War-era piece." Tutt snapped off the first bullet and missed. Hickok took a split second longer, steadied his gun with his left hand, carefully aimed, and hit Tutt in the chest. And that was that. In spite of their extreme rarity, these fast-draw duels became a staple of all those movie scenes where the Hollywood emphasis was on speed alone, says O'Neill. If there's one thing Hickok proved in this singular gunfight, it's that accuracy always takes precedence. El Paso gunfight on April 14th, 1881. In El Paso, Texas, dubbed the Four Dead in 5 seconds gunfight. One of the most famous instant bloodbaths of the era was triggered by the murders in El Paso, Texas, of two young vaqueros who had been tracking a herd stolen Mexican cattle, spurred by a large, angry Mexican posse seeking an investigation. A search would lead to the bodies of the missing farmhands at the ranch of Johnny Hale, a known cattle thief. This led to an inquest, with El Paso Constable Gus Kremko serving as Spanish interpreter. At a saloon later on, it also led to some heated words between Kremko and Hale's friend George Campbell, an ex-city marshal who branded the lawman a Mexican sympathizer. In the saloon, a drunken, unarmed Hale unexpectedly seized one of Campbell's pistols and shot Kremko at close range, killing him instantly. Hearing the commotion from a nearby restaurant, Dallas Staudenmeier, the newly appointed marshal of El Paso, quickly intervened, guns drawn and ready for action. Staudenmeier's first shot at Hale missed, killing a Mexican bystander. His next fatal shot hit Hale square in the head. Staudenmeier then turned his pistol on Campbell, who had since exited the saloon, claiming this wasn't his fight, pumping 3 bullets into his stomach. 4 dead in 5 seconds. That was Staudenmeier's first week on the job. Battle of Ingalls on September 1st, 1893. In Ingalls, Oklahoma Territory, described as the deadliest battle ever fought between organized banditry and deputy U.S. Marshals, in Glenn Shirley's definitive account, Gunfight at Ingalls, Death of an Outlaw Town. This short but vicious affair left 3 federal lawmen plus 2 town citizens dead, marking one of the greatest law enforcement debacles at the tail end of the Old West era. It started serendipitously enough when members of the recently reassembled Doolin-Dalton Gang, a.k.a. the Wild Bunch, were discovered hiding in the tiny young town of Duels, Oklahoma Territory. This was about a year after the famous shootout at Coffeyville, Kansas, where 2 Daltons were killed and 1 was captured during a foiled double bank robbery attempt, says Robert McCubbin, a founder of the Wild West History Association. The other brother, Bill Dalton, hadn't learned much from that. Instead, he teamed up with Bill Doolin's gang, an assortment of ex-cowboys who'd turned to robbing trains and banks. On a briefly quiet morning, a surprise cleanup crew of heavily armed deputy marshals and other lawmen entered Ingalls in 3 covered wagons. No words were exchanged when gang member George Bitter Creek Newcomb exited the town saloon and narrowly missed the first gunshot. A fatal hail of retaliatory bullets thrashed the lawmen, while all but one of the sharpshooting Doolin gang escaped a battle won in a war soon lost. Within a few short years, they were all hunted down and killed, says McCubbin. Newton General Massacre on August 20th, 1871, in Newton, Kansas. If there's a single late 19th century classic gun battle everyone in Kansas expects to read about here, it's the one down in Coffeyville. But for the sake of boosting historical attention where it's also due, we instead nominate this oft-overlooked saloon brawl by a bunch of no-names in Newton's briefly infamous farming community. About 25 miles north of Wichita, Newton logged its wildest year in 1871, during its brief time as an end-of-track railhead on the Chisholm Trail, and the unfriendliest confluence of cowboys and railroad workers in the West. On August 11 of that fateful year, Mike McCluskey, a railroad foreman, part-time lawman, and full-time hothead, got into it with a hard-drinking Lone Star gambler known as William Bailey. Both men used aliases over some local election results. A fistfight between the 2 men in the Red Front Saloon evolved into gunplay outside. McCluskey shot first, killing Bailey and fleeing town. Bailey's horde of Texas cowboy friends promised to exact their revenge if he ever returned. Cut to about an hour after midnight on August 20th. McCluskey was back. Bailey's avengers, led by a cowboy named Hugh Anderson, found the man sitting at a faro table at Perry Tuttle's dance hall. "You are a cowardly son of a bitch," Anderson told McCluskey, according to later court testimony, "and I will blow the top of your head off." Anderson fired low, hitting McCluskey in the neck. Down went McCluskey, furiously firing slugs. Several more cowboys then opened fire, along with a young friend of McCluskey's named Jim Riley, who emptied his barrel into the smoky fray. It was the ultimate saloon fight. The place just exploded with crossfire, says Western historian Bill O'Neill. All that black powder emitting vast clouds of white smoke. Inside a place like that must have been like a fog machine. The final toll, when the smoke and utter chaos had cleared: 5 killed and 6 wounded. Mike McCluskey would live until the following morning, claiming just before dying that his real name was Arthur Delaney, a name justice forgot. Northfield Bank raid on September 7, 1876. In Northfield, Minnesota. It was the second worst day of Jesse James' life. At about 2 in the afternoon, the legendary Missouri outlaw rode into a little town just south of Minneapolis called Northfield, with the usual suspects, Brother Frank, the younger boys, and a couple of sturdy accomplices for an easy, off-the-radar money grab at the First National Bank. Instead, a martyred bank clerk refused to open the safe. The alarm was raised, and the mobilized townsfolk all but wiped out the James Younger gang during a devastating street shootout. The citizens had no idea who these guys were. That would only come out later, says Western historian Mark Lee Gardner, author of To Hell on a Fast Horse and Shot All to Hell, Jesse James, The Northfield Raid, and the Wild West's Greatest Escape. What makes this gunfight a standout is that it was just everyday civilians who took on the most notorious, feared, and accomplished set of outlaws ever to ride the American West, and that they defeated them. Jesse James and Frank would narrowly escape this one, but the loss of the Youngers led to the Outlaws' association with the Fords, and ultimately the worst and the last day of his violent life. It's safe to say that there's a direct correlation between Northfield and the end of Jesse James, says Gardner. Harry Morse versus Juan Soto on May 10, 1871, in Valley, California. California's epic gun battle of the late 19th century was between just two heavies. Alameda County Sheriff Harry Morse, a tireless outlaw hunter, and his elusive white whale, a huge cross-eyed beast of a bandito named Juan Soto. A tip that Soto was hiding out in the Sausalito Valley, high in the coast range of central California near Hollister, had led Morse and a group of lawmen to a clearing of Adubs. Splitting up, Morse entered one of them with a posse member named Theodore Winchell, and unexpectedly found Soto lounging at a table with some women and compadres. Out came Morse's Smith & Wesson, Manos Arriba. What followed was a spectacular one-on-one gunfight for the ages, fought with pistols and rifles at close range, says John Bosnecker, author of Lawmen, The Life and Times of Harry Morse. Soto didn't budge. He just sat there menacingly. Morse ordered Winchell to cuff the burly outlaw. When Winchell lost his nerve, fleeing out the door in terror and leaving Morse short-handed, two of Soto's goons grabbed the sheriff while Soto leapt to his feet and struggled to draw his pistols. Somehow, Morse managed to get out of the adobe without being shot by the Soto, pursuing with his six-shooter in hand. Outside, Morse miraculously dodged several bullets from Soto, now armed with 3.5 shooters, during a theatrical battle that continually had Morse's men believing their partner was hit. Ultimately, Morse would prevail with a 100-plus-yard killing shot to Soto's head, cementing his reputation, notes Bosnecker, as the best-known peace officer and manhunter on the Pacific Coast. Frisco Shootout on October 18, 1884, in Frisco Plaza, New Mexico, armed with a pair of 6 shooters, a mail-order sheriff's badge, and some steel nerves, a bold 19-year-old New Mexican named Elfago Baca took it upon himself to arrest a drunken cowboy named Charlie McCarty, who was busy shooting at the feet of Mexican citizens in the small town of Frisco Plaza, now reserve, to make them dance. When McCarty's foreman, joined by a passel of punchers, demanded McCarty's release, Baca gave them 3 seconds to go away, and then began firing, killing the foreman, and leading an 80-man mob of cowboys to return the next morning. Baca took cover in a tiny hut. Hunkering on a recessed mud floor, he got some shots off while weathering an assault that allegedly sprayed the hut with 4,000 bullets, 367 in the door alone. After a 33-hour siege, 4 cowboy assailants would be dead, and Baca, very much alive, calmly cooking breakfast in the back. Or so the story goes. The siege ended with Baca's negotiated surrender under the sheriff's supervision. He faced several murder trials, won 2 acquittals, and went on to a long, prosperous life as an attorney, school superintendent, and politician. Luke Short versus long-haired Jim Cartwright. On February 8th, 1887, in Fort Worth, Texas, an easy nominee for last great duel of the Old West, this clash between two prized gunfighters was sparked by a fairly mundane dispute over gambling hall kickback. The players, Luke Short, a dapper gambler and saloon keeper who'd once dealt for the house at the Oriental Saloon in Tombstone, and recently had sold his stake in Fort Worth's White Elephant Saloon. Timothy Isaiah, long-haired Jim Cartwright, an ex-Fort Worth marshal who was back in Cowtown running a detective agency that was little more than an extortion operation. When Cartwright approached Short about protection money for the White Elephant, Short told him where to go. That's when people started talking about something brewing between these two guys, says Doug Harmon, a Western historian with the Texas Cowboy Hall of Fame. If any gunfight had a certain high noon-style anticipation, it was this one. A drunken Cartwright entered the town on the fateful night and called out Short. The two men stood face to face at close range outside the White Elephant. Short took off Cartwright's thumb on his first shot in one of the more well-documented but hard-to-believe draws. Unable to cock his pistol, Cartwright border shifted to his other hand. Too late. Short had already planted 2 bullets in his chest. The duel's aftermath wasn't short on irony, notes Harmon. The building Cartwright fell against when he died was a target practice spot called the Shooting Gallery, and to this day, the two men are buried just a few feet apart in Fort Worth's Oakwood Cemetery. Kashi Ranch standoff on April 1892 in Johnson County, Wyoming. A valiant standoff at the remote KC Ranch by local homesteader Nate Champion against a large band of hired gunmen was the epic, if peripheral, gun battle of Wyoming's Johnson County. A messy, highly symbolic engagement between small farmers and wealthy ranchers that would ultimately involve U.S. cavalry intervention at the main TA Ranch, siege site near the town of Buffalo. All the other fatalities in the Johnson County War were ambushes, just outright assassinations, says Bill O'Neill, author of the Johnson County War. But Nate Champion, who was high up on the cattle baron's rustler hit list, managed to hold off some 50-odd invaders for an entire day while cornered in a tiny cabin with a dying friend, a 6-gun, and a Winchester. During a frigid night, a group of hired guns and ranch foremen for the powerful Wyoming Stock Growers Association had surrounded Champion's cabin, capturing 2 innocent trappers on the property and picking off Champion's partner, Nick Ray, who'd ventured outside the following morning to look for them. Dragging a fatally shot Ray back inside the cabin, Champion staved off a murderous siege for hours while nursing his dying friend, jotting notes in a later retrieved diary, and enabling time for the attack posses to be raised in Buffalo. O'Neill adds that the invaders knew enough to give Champion a wide berth. He'd already been attacked by about half a dozen stock detectives out to get him the previous November. They'd busted into his cabin, and he single-handedly fended them off with 1 gun. That was the beginning of his legend, and KC was the end. Forced to attempt an escape later that afternoon when the cabin was set afire, Champion bolted for a nearby ravine and ran straight into mortal enemy fire. The cabin is long gone, but the town of KC remains a testament to Wyoming's most famous holdout, Champion's shootout on 1879 in Dodge City, Kansas. In the Long Branch Saloon of Dodge City, Kansas, a long-standing argument between Frank Loving and Levi Richardson would come to a head. Frank had married the owner of the bar not long before. He claimed that Levi was making advances on his wife. The two occasionally argued over this, eventually developing into a fistfight. Finally, in 1879, Levi was ready to finish the matter. He stormed into the bar, hoping to find Frank. Frank wasn't present, so Levi settled down to play poker. At 9 p.m., Frank finally strolled in, and the two sat at a table across from each other. Quite soon, both stood up shouting. Levi drew first, so Frank drew as well. Levi fired 5 times, while Frank fired 6, from the meager distance of a table width. Levi was hit across the chest, side, and arm. Frank, meanwhile, received a minor scrape on the back of one hand. Frank was arrested almost immediately and released a couple of days later under a self-defense ruling. He was 19 years old at the time. Davis Sidney Ducks shootout. If there is one man you don't want to face in a gunfight, it's Captain Jonathan R. Davis. On December 19th, 1854, he single-handedly took on a dangerous gang of robbers and killed 11 of them. Davis was a former Army captain turned prospector. On the day in question, he was working with his 2 partners when they were ambushed by a band of outlaws. Almost half of the men were Sydney Ducks, criminal immigrants from Australia. The rest were Mexicans, Americans, Brits, and even a Frenchman. 13 in total. They were thought to be responsible for 10 murders in just a few days prior. They charged the 3 prospectors, guns blazing. Davis' partners were gunned down immediately. One died on the spot, and the other succumbed to his wounds days later. Davis had time to pull out his revolvers and start firing. When he ran out of bullets, 7 outlaws were on the ground. 4 of the survivors decided to approach Davis with blades, 3 with bowie knives, and 1 with a sword. Unfortunately for them, Davis had his knife and was quite adept at using it. He took turns disarming and stabbing each one of his assailants, even cutting the nose off one of them. Finally realizing they had no chance, the remaining robbers ran for it. 7 of their comrades lay dead at Davis's feet, and 4 more later died of their injuries. Gunfight at the OK Corral on October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. This is the most famous Old West gunfight that turned Wyatt Earp into an icon. However, it involved 8 other people who attained different fame. At the time, older brother Virgil was their group's leader because he was the town marshal in Tombstone. Yet, Wyatt Earp captured America's imagination, mostly by appearing in popular dime novels. So, on one side we have 3 Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, and their friend Doc Holliday. On the other hand, we have 5 members of a notorious gang called the Cowboys, Ike and Billy Clanton, Billy Claiborne, and Tom and Frank McClory. There was a lot of tension between these factions, and the Cowboys made numerous not-so-veiled threats at the Earps. On October 26, 1881, they had finally had enough, and the 3 Earp brothers and Holliday approached the Cowboys, looking to settle the score. According to the Earps and witnesses, they didn't go there looking to fight. They told the Cowboys to surrender their weapons, and the gunfight started when they refused. By the end, 3 Cowboys were dead, Virgil and Morgan were wounded, and Doc had been grazed by a bullet. It only lasted 30 seconds and didn't actually take place at the OK Corral, but it was enough to secure its place in history. ERP Vendetta Ride. Not many gunfight stories mention the consequences, but this one directly results from the infamous OK Corral shootout. The Cowboys gang was large, so other members naturally sought revenge on the Earp brothers for their fallen comrade. This resulted in an attack that maimed Virgil Earp and an ambush that killed Morgan. In response, Wyatt, now a U.S. Marshal, formed a federal posse and went after the culprits in what would be known as the Earp Vendetta Ride. The posse rode from March 20th until April 15th, 1882, tracking down the Cowboys. In Tucson, they killed Frank Stillwell, one of the suspects in Morgan's murder. However, the highlight of the ride was a large shootout near Iron Springs on March 24th. The posse came upon 9 members of the Cowboys, including William Brocious, a.k.a. Curly Bill, another participant in Morgan Earp's assassination. Curly Bill saw the posse approaching and was the first to fire his shotgun at Wyatt, but he missed. Earp fired back and hit Bill square in the chest, killing him instantly. What followed was a gunfight between the 2 factions, but nobody else was killed, except for a horse belonging to one of the lawmen, Texas Jack Vermillion. Eventually, the Cowboys made their escape. During the gunfight, Earp was shot numerous times through his clothes. One bullet hit his boot heel and another hit his saddle horn, but he otherwise escaped unscathed once again. On that note, we end today's episode. Thank you for joining us once again. We hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates.